and welcome to week 13 or unit 13 of our lecture where we will be discussing about Python functions. Python functions is a block of related statements designed to perform a computational, logical, or evaluative task. The idea is to put some commonly or repeatedly done tasks together and make a function so that instead of writing the same code again and again for different inputs, we can do the function calls to reuse the code contained in it over and over again. Functions can be both built-in or user-defined. It helps the program to be concise, non-repetitive, and organized. Types of functions. Basically, we can divide functions into the following two types. We have built-in and user-defined. Built-in functions are the functions that we have discussed from our previous lectures. If you will remember, we sometimes we can call this function by calling period after the particular variable or object, and then passing arguments inside an open and close parentheses. Those are the built-in functions. They are already created or built into Python. For our topic today, we will be discussing specifically about user-defined functions, wherein they are functions defined by the users themselves. So what is the syntax for user-defined function? The syntax is def, function name, open close parentheses, and parameters. A function can take one or more parameters or variables. Parameters are the variables inside our function, wherein we can use those parameters in order to play around or return a particular value that we want. Now, inside a function, we can have a doc string or a document string, the statements, and a return value. Okay, always remember that functions return a value. Could either be any data type or could even be a null value. Null value meaning to say we are returning a blank value. Okay, to create a function, we use the def keyword. Now this is our first example. Okay, now in this sample, we have def or define functions. The name of our function is one, open close parenthesis. Take note, we're not accepting any parameter in this particular function. Okay, and then inside the function, we are printing welcome to GFT. Once we execute this one, there is no output simply because we are just declaring the function and we are not using it. Okay. Now, how do we call a function? After creating a function, we can call it by using the name of the function followed by parentheses containing parameters of that particular function. Now, going back to the example, okay, we have added this particular line wherein we are calling the functions that we have created for fun. Take note, we're calling it by using the name, open close parenthesis, and providing any parameters. In this case, there is no parameter. Therefore, we just call it blank. Example, calling parameter. So we will display welcome to GFT. We have called them 10 to 9. Okay. Arguments of a function. Arguments are the values found or passed inside the parentheses of the function. A function can have any number of arguments separated by a comma. Okay. So we have this particular example. We will create a simple function to check whether the number passed as an argument to the function is even or odd. Okay. So we will create function called even odd, and then we will have x as our argument or parameter. If x modulus 2 is equals to 0, meaning there is no remainder, we print events. Else, we print add. Afterwards, we use the function and then we supply the value 2 and 3 to our arguments. So what is the output? So 2 is even, 3 is add. Types of arguments. Python supports various types of arguments that can be passed at the time of the function call. So let's discuss each type. We have what we call a default argument. A default argument is a parameter that assumes a default value if a value is not provided in the function call for that argument. So the following example illustrates default argument. So, okay, in this example, we have the function called myFun having two parameters x and y. Notice y is has a value of 50. So x comma y is equals to 50. Take note that our arguments are separated by comma. And then in this instance, this is called y is equals to 50 is called the default argument simply because we are declaring a default value for y, and we can call this particular function by only providing the value of x. So if we did not provide the value of y will have the value of 50. Okay. So in this example, we will call my fun 10. So once we execute it, okay, value of x is 10, y is 50. But what will happen if we provide a value for y? Notice that once we provided a value for y, that value will be accepted. Any number of arguments in a function can have a default value, but once we have a default argument, all the arguments to its right must also have default values. Keyword arguments. So take note, once we declare a default argument, we must we must remember that we must pass a value to that particular uh, variable once we have multiple default arguments. So for example, we have x comma y is equals to 50 comma z. Okay, if that is the instance, what happens is that, okay, so I will see, if this is a particular instance, you must provide the value for both x, y, and z. Otherwise, this particular function will not work. Okay, if we try this out, okay, notice the error. But what if I will just provide two values? Still an error. So we must provide values for all the arguments. Okay, take note of that. And if it's this instance, mhm, you must provide a default argument also for our variable. Keyword arguments. The idea is to allow the caller to specify the argument name with values so that caller does not need to remember the order of parameters. So via keyword. One word argument. Okay, in this instance, guys, we have function student having two variables, the first name and the last name. Okay, then we will print the value of first name and last name. So in this instance, if you want to call the name of the particular variable or argument, you can do that and then provide the value. So notice in these two lines, the first name comes first, followed by the last name. But in this line, we call the last name and we call the first name. So that is also possible using keyword arguments. Variable length argument. In Python, we can pass a variable number of arguments to a function using special symbols. There are two special symbols, asterisk arc or non-keyword argument, or double asterisk fork or keyword argument. Sample 1. Variable non-keyword. Okay. In this example, we have the function called myFun. We have asterisk parameter rv or argv. For r in argv, print arg. So in this instance, asterisk arg stands for variable number of arguments, meaning to say we can input or place any number of arguments here. And what happens is that the variable argv will contain all of that arguments and then pass it for the variable arg inside a for in loop, which will print each and every value. Okay? Take note, I can add arguments, okay, and I can also remove the values for the argument. Simply, this is because we are using asterisk as our variable, okay, parameter, which means that it can be any number of values. Okay. Sample 2. Now, if we have any number of variables, we also have what we call a variable length keyword argument. So we use asterisk, double asterisk KARGS for variable number of keywords. So notice what we do is to create a function called myFun, and then using key value. Okay, this is using key value pairs. We use a for loop, so for key comma value in forks.item, meaning to say it will get all the key value pairs inside our parameter, and then it will print the key value pair. So using percentage %s, if you will remember, percentage %s helps us display string values or variables. Percentage %s is equals to percentage %s, percentage, and then it will display the value key for the first string, and then secondly, value for the second string. Okay. Next is docstring. The first string after the function is called the document string or docstring in short, used to describe the functionality of the function. The use of docstring in function is optional, but it is considered a good practice. So the syntax for docstring is print open close parenthesis function name dot underscore underscore doc underscore underscore close parenthesis. Okay. So if we use that one, so in this example, this is the docstring. It is enclosed in triple quotes. So in order for us to call the docstring, we use print to display, and then the name of the function. So even add that, double underscore doc, double underscore. And then what this does is that instead of printing the output of the function, it will print the doc string of the function. So that is how you would call the doc string. Again, name of the function, that double underscore doc, double underscore. The return statement. The function return statement is used to exit from a function and go back to the function caller and return the specified value or data item to the caller. The return statement can consist of a variable expression or a constant which is returned to the end of the function execution. If none of the above is present with the return statement, a non-object or null object is returned. So in this example, we will define a function called square value being parameter argument of num, and then num will be multiplied to self or multiplied twice self, and then we will print the square value. Square value of 2 is 4, and square value of negative 4 is 16. Its function, its Python function passed by reference or passed by value. One important thing to note is that in Python, every variable name is a reference. When we pass a variable to a function, a new reference to the object is created. So for example, we have variable x index here is 20, okay? And then using our um, function, we create a list having these values, and then we place our list inside my fun, and then we print the value of the list. The value of the list was printed, but notice that the first index from 10 it became what? Became 20. So that is passing passing reference passing reference to our function. So notice that x is our argument. It's a different variable. But once we pass the variable LST, which is a list, okay, we change the value of index 0 from 10 to 20. When we pass a reference and change the received reference to something else, the connection between the pass and received parameter is missing. So for example, consider the following proof. This example, guys, is almost the same as the previous example, but this time x will be a list having values of 20, 30, and 40. And then we create a list having these values, and then we pass the list to my fun, and then what will happen to the values inside this? Okay. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. What happens here is that simply because x, guys, is parameter or an argument, and then we create x to a list, and we pass LST with variable to our function. What happens is that list is not modified, okay? Simply because a new object was created for x. We are not setting a value as from the previous example, but we are already creating a new object. Okay? So therefore, LST was not affected. Okay? That's it, guys. That's a basic introduction to our function. Next meeting, we will modify some of our codes from the previous lecture to meet these functions. That's it. Thank you. And if you have any questions, just drop a message in our Discord.